Hello everyone. Today is the day 12th of the training. So let us see some assignment questions. The first question is explain OWASP 10 security risks with example. So OWASP is nothing but Open Web Application Security Project. So which is an open online source. So which will publish the awareness documents, methodologies, tools for the developers in the field of web application security. So it is mainly concerned on the security, web security itself. So next we shall see 10 top security risks with examples. So the first one is broken access control, cryptographic failures. Third one is injection. Fourth one is insecure design, security misconfiguration, vulnerable and outdated components, identification, authentication failures, software and data integrity failures, security logging and monitor failures, server-side request forgery. So all these we shall see in details. The first one is broken access control. So the broken access control is nothing but when you are giving some authentication to the user from the server side. So you give only the particular kind of authentication. So you don't give the entire access control. When you give the entire access control, this will be utilized by the hacker. For example, if you can see here, the user code is 123. So the name user code is hidden by the attacker. So this code will be entered as a 123 itself. So the user code is 126 here, but the attacker value it as 123, so that the use web server does not get confused, but it identifies it as an authenticated user. So this is how the broken access control will be more vulnerable to the attackers or to the web security. So this is how the attackers gain access to the web server database, etc. So next one is cryptographic failures. So cryptography is nothing but encryption of the data. So when you send some data to the server and receive some data to the server, that data should not be in the plain text. So usually what they will do is encryption. So this encryption is nothing but when you are sending a data that is A, you send that A, which means that is X. So B, if you send B, that means that is Y. So when you send this ABCD data, and the receiver will be knowing that ABCD is nothing but XYZA. So this is how they encrypt the overall data. So what happens in cryptographic failure? So after doing all these kinds of encryption, so some of the users like us, we forget to authentify the data or forget to close encrypt our data. For example, as we saw in the earlier, so user one here. So user here, he has given the credit card number. So usually what we do, we keep the credit card numbers, all those credentials as in the plain text. We don't encrypt those data. So this is the vulnerable thing. What the attacker will do is he will gain the access to the target network, and also he will go to the password section, that is our database password section. He will gain access to that, and he will take that data, and he will just simply run over the various kinds of web applications. So various kinds of websites also. So during this process, one of the website will get access. That's how they will get the access to the various kinds of websites and also to the data. So this is mainly because of the cryptographic failures. Next one is the injection. Injection is nothing but injecting something into the web server. So for example, here you just inject some malicious data to the application so that that application does not recheck or validate the data which is sent by the user. For example, here the attacker sends some HTTPS information to directly to the web server. That web server doesn't validate that data. So when you doesn't validate that data, when you directly give access to the attacker, so what will happen? The database will get stolen. This is how the sensitive data is stolen by the attacker because of this injection methodology. Next one is insecure design. So when it comes to the say insecure design, we have to make sure that APIs are strong. So we'll talk about APIs in the latest section. So what will happen here is attacker will check the vulnerable APIs. So usually APIs, the application programming interfaces, what they will do is the interface between the user and the server. So when you gain access to the API, you can gain access to the both user and also to the database also. Here the in the insecure designs in the APIs, so the attacker will easily attacks the database and also to the user information. Next one is security misconfiguration. Usually what happens here is when you are doing some security designs, you have to make sure the designs are up to date. So what happens here is, when when an attacker is continuously monitoring the particular server, thus that server should gain that server should send a malicious activity to the owner or the admin. But here, what happens here is the security is misconfigured in some ways. So that misconfiguration or finding that loophole by the attacker will leads to the internal resources to the malicious activity. This is how the security misconfiguration in the website leads to the leaks in the database. Next one is vulnerable and outdated components. Usually the servers or the database or the network components, routers, switches, those will be outdated. So that outdated components will not be, susceptible or more, uh, stronger to the latest software security features or the software hacking methodologies. So what will happen here is when the outdated components are not updated, those are more vulnerable to the security. So this is how when the attacker sees the outdated components, he will send his malicious data. So that's how he exploits the server. That's how he get into the internal resources and catches the database. Next one is identification and authentication failures. Identification and authentication is nothing but when you're creating a server or when you're creating database or any website, so you give the identification and authentication to the particular users. So what will happen here is the attacker uses the credential or the password which has already stolen from the database. He uses those compromised credentials to different websites. So when he gives to different websites, the credentials to those websites, those websites will get open. Some will get open, some will not get open because of this authentication. Because some will have a strong features, some doesn't will have a authentication features. For example, if you take Google, so Google is having two-step authentication. So when you are logging into Gmail, it sends a notification to your mobile phone that whether you are actively logging in or somebody else is logging in. So this is how the authentication and identification so comes into pictures. So this is how everybody cannot be a Google like take measures. This is how that an attacker takes the chance to get into the features of the website. Next one is software and data integrity failures. So when we are developing a software, so we store all the software into the Git repository basically. So when we store those Git repository, so data into the Git repository, that data will be sent it to so that data will be made as an application and that application will be used by the user. So what happens here is the attacker will peep into the pipeline itself. So when he peep into the pipeline, so he can get access. He will send the malicious code instead of sending the original code. He will send this malicious code, which is more vulnerable. So this is how the attacker gets into the user's data or into the applications. So software integrity is also the biggest problem nowadays. Next one is security logging and monitoring failure. So if someone or attacker, he continuously monitors the application server. Every day he logs into the server and he try to attack the server or logging into the server. So when he continuously logging into the server or an unknown person is logging into a server, the server should notifies the admin. So here the server doesn't notifies the admin. This is the biggest failure. So when the server doesn't notifies that unknown person is logging into the system, so the attacker will take it as a chance. So he will further go on with the investigation and he'll breaks the system and he detects the entire database and he take the entire database system or that he takes the entire database information. This is how the security logging and monitoring features are the biggest important things in the website or the web designing or in the systems. Next one is server-side request forgery. So the server-side request forgery is nothing but the attacker just sends the hex double TP request. So to the web application. Here, what happens here is the flaws occur whenever a web application is fetching a remote resource without validating the supplied URL. So that means when the server is detecting some URL or detecting some logging in. So that's how when the server should detect the whether it is a valid user or whether it is not a valid user. So this is how when you don't identify the actual URL, authentified actual URL, so a forgery URL can be sent to the web application. This is how the web applications get failure by forging the URLs or the requestable TP request. This is how the internal resources get stolen by the attacker. So these are some top 10 OWASP security features which they have published. Now let us see the next question. So what is an endpoint? What are different types of API request example? So explain examples. So the first one is what is endpoint. So the endpoint is nothing but when you are sending a data, so you use the particular device. When you are receiving the data, you are using a particular device. So this is nothing but an endpoint. When you are transmitting and receiving data, this is nothing but an endpoint. For example, computer, mobile devices, laptops, whatever it is, these kinds are called as endpoints. So next thing is API. So API is not an endpoint, but it is a application. So this application, what it will do is, it is based on protocol. It secures the two network or the two endpoints. So we cannot say endpoint is similar as API. API is different and endpoint is different. So when it comes to the client, this is also an endpoint. When it comes to the server, this is also an endpoint. Basically, this is the route between client and server is made by the API, which is having a particular protocol. That protocol will be having a security features. So next is what are types of APIs? Usually there are different types of APIs, that is private APIs, which is managed for the internal companies like end-to-end system within the organization. Next one is public. Public APIs are nothing but which is not an organization, which is outside the restriction where anybody can have an access. So sometimes there will be an authentication or maybe not. Next one is partner authentication, also the composite APIs. So these are the different types of APIs. Next one, we shall see the how the API works. Usually there are many types of API workings. The first one is WebSocket. So here what will happen is, so the WebSockets are nothing but, so it is also a kind of API where the JSON is used here. So in order to pass the data from user to the server, so JSON data is sent here. So the next one is RPC. So RPC is nothing but remote procedure calls. So what will happen here is the client completes a function or the procedure on the server itself. They doesn't go anywhere other than that, and they doesn't do anywhere other than that. Next one is SOAP APIs. SOAP APIs are nothing but simple object access protocols. So here the client and the server side exchange the data using XML documents or XML file. Next one is the most important thing, that is REST APIs. So REST APIs are nothing but representational state transfers. So these are the most widely used and it is very flexible. And this REST API uses HTML data to transfer the data between server and the user. So usually the REST APIs uses get, put, post, delete, patch, these kinds of functions in the APIs. Usually the get API is nothing but in order to get the information, post in order to post the information. So delete is nothing but delete the information, all these things. When you take an example for the APIs, so when you have a weather bureau, so that weather bureau continuously broadcasts information. So when information through the APIs, when you want some information, you just click in your mobile app. So you access those information through the API securely. So this is how the API works. So Google uses the API, Twitter also uses the API. Like when you want to post something in the Twitter, you just post the information in the user. When you want to get that information, you just uh, use the get as the APIs in model. So these are the things like Spotify, Dropbox, database, all these things. So next one, we shall see what are samplers and listeners in load testing and explain with examples. So before going to samplers and listeners, we shall see what is JMeter. JMeter is nothing but it is a tool which is used for automation testing. So in JMeter, we have thread group. Thread group is nothing but it is the number of users group. So suppose if we have 100 number of users, so that is called as thread group, 100 thread group. So in that thread group, we have samplers, logic controllers, listeners, and different types of modules and functions here. Basically, samplers are nothing but, so it sends request to a server and wait for the response in the JMeter. So it is nothing but basically it is sending some information to the server. That's it. That is the main feature in the samplers. So samplers uses FTP request, HTTP request, JDBC request, BSF, etc. All these things samplers will do. Next one is listener. So listener is nothing but when we send samples to the server, it has to receive some information. So that received information is listened by the listener. So that listener will display all these features in terms of graph, table, tree, and log data. So this is all about samplers and listeners. So let us see. Um, let us see some JMeter feature here. So we have a test plan. So let us add a thread group here. So I'll make the number of threads as 10 and loop count as 10 here. We'll save it. Again, I will add some sampler. So I'll add a HTTP request here. So let's add teknotrait.com. The protocol HTTP, or you can, HTTP. The path, we don't know which path we are going next. So let us assume it as slash here. The HTTP request can make, post, get, different kinds of options here. As of now, we will take it as get. Now let's save it. We have already sent those sampler here. So let us add a listener with the results tree. So let us also add a listener with a graph result. Let us also add a listener with view results in table. So you can add any type of listener you want. So whether it is in graph, tree table, or results tree, etc. Now we have already configured this. So there is no change to be made as of now. So let us run this. Here it takes, this is the table where it takes around different seconds in order to run the 10 users, that is thread. So it is running 22 seconds. Usually the J meter is used for the performance testing. So now it is ending. So it took around 39 seconds to run this group that is made of 10 threads. So now let us see view results tree. So in this result, we are seeing this, we have sent already HTTP request. So we have this request, we have teknotrait.com. When you go to response, so here we can see so how the page is made and what are the information, metadata, all those things. So which SEO they have used, who used SEO, all those things. Also, when it comes to the graph result, we can see the throughput and also deviations and also data average, median, all these things in the graph data. When it comes to the results in table, we can see the different kinds of results in terms of latency, connection times, number of bytes sent, number of sent. So sent bytes, actual sent bytes, all these things, and sample time, all these things we can see in this JMeter. So this is all about samplers and listeners in load testing. So this is all about today's training. Please kindly review the video. Thank you.